Okay, guys, here we go again. This is Marketing Management Money with Ryan Murray, Ryan Owens, where we take you through all things small business. We love to talk about the marketing side, the management side, and the money side. Today, we are going to focus on the marketing side. We are going to look at a topic basically focusing on branding and what goes into branding, what makes it happen, and what makes it not happen. And specifically today, I want to talk a little bit about consistency in branding, because you see this a lot in small businesses where they're a bit all over the board. I've been guilty of this often.
I think that a lot of small businesses, they just have so much going on, right? And branding isn't something you focus on necessarily right up front. You're trying to get sales, you're trying to get your books in line, you're trying to get all these other things going, and branding is not top priority.
See, and this is funny because for you, you're like second nature. You're like, oh yeah, do you have this, and me, I'm just like, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Because to me, it honestly is like weeding the garden.
It's funny because I hate weeding the garden. That's like the worst thing on the planet to me.
That's how I feel when it comes to branding, because it's like you go and, you get your garden. I enjoy gardening. I'm not great at it, but I enjoy it.
Sure.
And I love in the spring when you freshly tilled the dirt and it's just, it's like that dark, rich color and it's beautiful. And then you go and you put your starts in and everything looks so clean and organized and fresh.
Yeah.
And then in about 2 weeks, there's a couple weeds that are popping up.
Yeah.
And, maybe you go out and you weed them. And, a couple more weeks, the weeds are coming on stronger. And, a month later, like, you can't tell the plants from the weed, at least in my garden. Like, there are other people.
Yeah.
And it really boils down to, I don't like going out there and weeding every single day. I just, and with branding, it's like if you're not staying on top of it, easy peasy. But if you're not staying on top of it, those weeds come in, and then before you know it, they're like choking out the plants.
Yeah. It's one of those things that I feel like everybody wants to, at least in a lot of cases, people that I work with on branding, they want to have that very concise set of rules or whatever. They want to have this branding guideline or some set of
a visual guideline.
Yeah, some way to say, like, in this case we do this, in this case we do this, and in this case we do this. But guess what? That's not how small business goes. There aren't 3 cases. There are 100,000 million, billion, trillion, gazillion, as my kids would say, cases. And I mean, there's always little variations to things. Whether that's you're doing some sort of a promotional card and you're working with another company this time and they want to have their branding on it as well. Okay, well, that changes things. So now what? Yeah. You know what I mean? So there are all these little cases that come up, and it's not just so clean and like so cut and dry as people want it to be.
One of the challenges is if you are a large enough company, which, I mean, that's not really the audience that we're talking to. I mean, if there are people that are CEOs of multinationals and they're listening to our podcast, thank you.
Right.
But, we're talking to the people that, like, you've got a team of 3.
Yeah.
It's you and these 2 other guys that are making this happen.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you don't have one person dedicated to making sure that, all of your branding is on point. It's like you throw something out there and you're moving quick, you're moving agile. That's where I'm not good at. I understand the concepts of it.
Sure.
I totally get how to do it. But when I'm in business and I'm, trying to make things happen and it's moving and it's going quick, I just don't like.
Yeah.
I get lost in the minutia.
So branding is definitely one of those things that requires you to slow down and do it right, so to speak, right? So you've got to be on your game in terms of branding.
You're good at this. Like, this is a solid strength that you have. Start us out. Lay some basic foundations, some obvious, this is what you want to do to at least give yourself a fighting chance.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like in our audience, let me actually go back to what I was just about to say, because I think that ties into
Okay.
where we're going to go here. Branding is something that you need to slow down, take your time, and do it right. It's not one of these things that you're constantly going to be cleaning up your mess if you just like throw something at the wall, see if it sticks, and then come back and try to fix it, right?
Uh-huh.
If you
Let me pause you for a second.
Sure.
Because I get, for you, this is almost second nature, and you know exactly what we're talking about. But I'm thinking to myself, most of the small businesses that I've worked with, if I just tell them, like in your branding, if you just throw something against the wall and see if it
Touche.
sticks, like
Touche.
they don't know if you're talking about the logo, website, social media, the flyer that they just printed, the T-shirt that they're wearing, the sticker on their car. Like, what are you talking about here?
So I actually really appreciate that clarification because it is an important one. As you generate any kind of collateral, whether that's digital, print, whatever, when you generate any kind of collateral that is going to be seen outside of your company, and again, this is physical, digital, whatever. It's important that you remain consistent in your presentation, right?
Okay.
So like you mentioned, in terms of your logo, whether that's on a sticker that goes on your car or on a sales flyer that goes out to some potential customers, whatever, like your logo should be presented the same.
And
right?
so as long as I'm using blue and green, I stick with blue and green and I'm good.
Sure. Yeah. No.
I'm baiting you a little bit
I know.
because this is a big enough topic that we're going to have a hard time wrapping it up in one episode because there's so many aspects to it. And so, I'm going to prod you a little bit and see where we go.
I just had the clouds part a little bit here, and I had some clarity. So you're going for more of this like down in the trenches, doing the work kind of branding side of things. And I'm trying to stay a little bit more theoretical for a moment, but we'll meld the two.
Like I said, you're better at this than I am. So wherever you want to go, great one.
Whatever. Jeez. So, it's really important to stay consistent. And so there are certain things that you can do in a small business to remain consistent. To get down into the trenches, into the weeds a little bit, that's something like having what's called branding guidelines or a style guide or something along those lines. Like you'll hear it called different names, but essentially what
Visual
it is,
identity, whatever.
Yeah. So essentially what it is it lays out what your logo is in terms of if that's a graphic, if that's some sort of font, whatever. It lays out exactly what it is. It lays out the different use cases for it and how the formatting appears in those use cases. For example, if you are using it on your website, it's going to look one way. And it may look the same if you print it on a sales flyer. But then if you used it in social media and it's supposed to be this square format or a round format, that becomes a little bit different. If you have this secondary icon that fits there better, you need to lay that out and say exactly how that shows up. And when you're using colors, you'll use hex code or you'll use an RGB code or a Pantone color. You'll identify with a code, a number of sorts, identifying exactly what that color is because it's not just orange, right? So we've talked about this in the past where you correct me if I'm wrong here, but for your anniversary, you get orange roses for your wife. You get an extra one every year you're married.
Yeah, I do.
So I was helping you with this one year and helping you track down orange roses because it's like in November or something, right?
Yeah, it's technically in January.
January. How are you going to find orange roses? That was a terrible idea, man.
I know. And we actually got married in July, so this isn't even like it was one of those things, when you're young and in love, you think, I can do this. And now here I am 20 some odd years later, and it's really hard to come up with orange roses.
Wow. In January.
Anyway,
So you're trying to find orange roses, but it's not just orange roses, because orange roses that I could find are completely different from orange roses that you can find.
I
Like if you're
remember.
finding 10 and I'm finding 12, you know what I mean?
Right. And I remember we were going through that process and it was a bit awkward.
Yeah. So same thing with your branding, right? It can be a bit awkward if you say, hey, we're going to use purple here, and one purple that you use is lilac, and the other purple that you use is like electric Laffy Taffy type purple, right? It's not the same brand.
Right.
I mean, you would never, I mean, think about Coca-Cola or think about any of the big name brands. They have very consistent, a very consistent display of how they show their brand.
Sure. Yeah.
They don't use different reds or, variations of blue or whatever, right? It's very consistent. And if they do deviate from that, it's, if you could kind of go behind the curtain, you could see the Wizard of Oz, right?
Right.
You would see that when they do decide to deviate from that, it's laid out very clearly exactly what they're going to do.
Your primary colors, your secondary colors.
Yeah, the parameters around that, how long they're going to be using that, what products it extends to, which ones it doesn't, what types of media they're going to use it in, all these things. And so that's why, I mean, we're getting really, really in the weeds here.
Yeah. I was going to say, we went in the trenches and then got in the weeds in the trenches.
Yeah. So I want to pull back up a little bit because that's, what you're getting here is a sense of why I said up front that branding is something that's very methodical. It's slow down and do it right. Take your time to do it.
Okay,
So,
but why does this matter? Like,
because it all comes back to introducing confusion to your clients. And what we say time and time again is if you introduce confusion, you're losing sales, period.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you are coming across as a brand that doesn't have their crap together, then you're going to lose the trust of your clients or your potential clients, or you're going to introduce confusion to them and they're going to say, wait, is this the same brand that I was dealing with over here? Or they come to your checkout process and those colors are different. Wait, am I dealing with some
scam online?
Nigerian prince
Yeah.
scam kind of deal, And so while in the rush of entrepreneurialism and startups and small business, it can seem like such a minute thing. And in a lot of cases it is. I'm not going to say that this is like, if you don't do this, you're going to burn to the ground and you're never going to have a small business that's successful.
Most small businesses screw this up long before they ever get it right, and they still make money.
Yeah, they do just fine, right?
But at some point, it is going to hurt your sales. And if you want to have successful marketing, you look at the behemoths that really have dialed in their marketing. And, it's fascinating that subconsciously, the primary color scheme that Google uses.
Yeah.
And it's always there. You don't even recognize that it's there, and it's always there. And it's like, oh yeah, that's partly why they grew to be such a massive company. Is it was very simple.
Yeah.
Their brand is extraordinarily simple, but it's well thought out and consistent, and just it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so let's talk about for a second how a small business can use this to their advantage and not have it be something that's like, oh my gosh, now I got to start doing that. And I don't have the time for that. It's because it's still just me and these two other guys. You know what I mean? So how can a small business start to implement some of these things and make sure that they're not shooting themselves in the foot by slowing down and losing sales that way, but still not shooting themselves in the foot by screwing up their branding?
And I'm glad that you're bringing it into kind of some tangibles, some actionable steps for small businesses, because really the crux of this episode in my mind is not saying there's a right way to do this and you better follow the right way.
Exactly. There's no right way.
There's no right way, but there's some better ways. And, the more that you can improve upon this, and it's not just improving upon the branding, it's improving upon the consistency and improving upon the efficacy so that you're not wasting a lot of time doing this.
Exactly. So I would say for the first step that I would take as a small business that's kind of to that point where like you're growing, you've gotten a lot of sales, you're probably experiencing some pain points like, oh man, like we really should bring on another person. What are they going to do? Do we really need to have them come on? That kind of a space, right? You're still in the trenches of wearing multiple hats and that kind of thing. But so in that kind of a scenario, what I would say is probably the first step that I would take is start to develop some level of consistency, get that documented, right? And what I mean by that is starting with this style guide. And you could look up online, you can see how lots of people do their different style guides. I would keep it simple. I would start with your logo, your colors, and your fonts that you use, and I would lay out what those are, right? Which ones do you use for headers on things, for body copy on things, the logos like we talked about, if you use them on letterhead or if you use them on your website or if you use them on social media, how those look, what those are laid out like. And if you need to reach out to a web person that you've been working with to get pixels and dimensions and things like that, by all means do that. Get that put in this document. And then what I would do, and actually probably this would be kind of a simultaneous process, is looking at the documents or the use cases where you most frequently see your branding, whether that's on letterhead, your website, invoices, whatever. And I would tailor your branding guidelines, your style guide around those things. I would make sure that all of those are included in this guide. Beyond that, there are 100,000 million billion trillion different cases that you can come up with.
Now, but hang on,
don't go there yet.
I'm going to throw something in there that you kind of alluded to, but you didn't come out and state, and I think it's worth being very, very direct with this. Once you have this stuff, template it. You need to create templates.
Oh yeah.
So if you're going to, if you're going to invoice your clients, create an invoice template and just be like, okay, all I have to do is fill in their information and the amount.
So that was actually the next step that I was going to go to. Like, you're spot on. That's perfect. So that you're exactly right. Like that's the next thing that's going to make your business not only consistent, not only more impressive to your clients and whatnot, but it'll make things, like you said, so much more efficient and effective in how you run your business. Because once you come up with a template for your invoicing, like it's done in a snap, right? You don't have to constantly come into Microsoft Publisher and pull in this, wait, where was that file? Where was that image? Once, and I realize that's kind of a ridiculous example, but we see that time and time again where people are recreating documents of one kind or another constantly from scratch.
Anything you have to do more than once needs a template.
Exactly.
Anything. If it's an email that gets sent out repetitively, template it.
Yeah, right. We put together an email signature for a reason. That's part of your branding. So if you use emails a lot, make sure your email signature is in your branding guidelines.
Yeah.
Because then when you have Joe Schmo come on as your new sales guy and he's like, well, I don't like that email signature, I'm going to do my own. No, Joe. We do it this way.
I was working with a company once, and they had it was a bigger business. They had about 50 employees, and they had about 5 or 6 variations of email signatures, formal, official email signatures.
Happens all the time. All the time.
And I'm like, no. 1, maybe 2, if you have a clear distinction of
like different divisions of the company or something.
Yeah, maybe.
Right.
But 1, you can get by with thousands of employees using one email signature.
Yep, exactly. And that's the thing with branding, is that you'll find that it really is ultra simple. It can be incredibly complex.
Okay.
But in terms of it's like the simplicity comes in, like you're saying with your example, like weeding the garden, right? Going out and weeding the garden once a day is incredibly simple.
Yeah.
Everything that goes on around that in practice is not simple, right? And that's kind of the distinction here is like there are 100,000 different things you can think of and try to put into a style guide or whatever. But it's important to just have that centralized document laid out clearly with the things that you use the most to guide what you do.
So I agree with everything that you've said. And I think it's good information. Nothing that you said to me was like a big shock factor. Like, I'm like, oh, wow, I really am so glad that I got that gem. But I'm going to ask you a question. And this piece right here is where I don't know of a good source to answer this question.
Sure.
And so I'm going to throw it at you. We only have, we've got a couple minutes left before we're going to wrap up the episode. So I'm going to put some pressure on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. I know a lot of businesses that they have their guides out there and they're just like, oh yeah, they've got their guide. And it hasn't been updated since 1994.
Sure.
And, because it's gone on so long, it looks very dated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, okay, you need to update this. But the problem is they can do a massive overhaul.
Sure.
What happens when you don't want to do a massive overhaul, but you want to make some changes?
Sure.
And you're like, okay, I need to change my packaging. Yeah. And so I'm going to update my packaging. But I already have 30 SKUs out there.
Yeah, right.
And so if I'm going to update this, do I now have to throw away all of the print packaging that I already bought in bulk so that I could get a better deal on it?
Right.
Or do I only update this one package to where it now looks different from everything? We've lost consistency. So every time I want to make an update to any of my packages, I have to scrap all 30 of them and start fresh so that they all have consistent branding, or I create a hodgepodge, or how do you deal with this? Is the one that I show me the unicorn, because I don't know how to do this.
See, and I love that you brought this up, because I feel like this is a pressure and a pain point that lots of businesses feel, right? Even if whether they have a style guide, whether they're following branding guidelines or not, whether this is brand new for them or they've been doing this for 20 years, this is still a pain point all the time for everybody.
And I've been asked this in my consulting, and it's one of those moments where I'm just like, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope everything else I told you was good enough that you'll keep me on.
Right. I get another check, right? Just kidding. But seriously, there's a really simple solution for this. And it's not it's not this magical unicorn that everybody's looking for, because a lot of times you see businesses that they say, we did our branding guidelines in 1994. Why are we doing this again? You know what I mean? Why didn't it work? Well, it's 2020. So, there have been a few things in the world that have changed,
right?
But there really is a simple way to do this. And it is neither, but also both of the cases that you pointed out. It's not just letting this run on and on for the rest of the business's foreseeable future and get more and more messy, but it's also not stopping everything that you're doing, throwing everything away and starting fresh. The best way that I have seen small businesses implement this in practice, right? Not in theory, but actually in practice,
right, is
taking it small, right? Like, once your garden gets full of weeds, like you go through and you weed it and you're like, that's clean, and that you got to go out and you got to weed your tomato plant, and you got to make sure you water your pear tree, and you've got to, you have these 3 things that you go out and do all the time.
Right.
But then all of a sudden you're adding in string beans, and you're adding in cucumbers, and you're adding in squash, and you don't have rules set up for those, right? Uh-huh. Now it's like, holy crap, I have all these new things, and it's like, well, now I got to go weed this, and I got to water that, and I got to fertilize this, and I got to, you don't, right? It's okay. Your business is running effectively where it's at, and that's okay. It can continue to run that way. all you need to do is start evaluating, right? Whether, and again, this is different for every company. If you want to take some time and sit down and say, we're going to take this afternoon, or we're going to take the next week, I don't know, whatever you feel is necessary to identify the new cases that we have for our branding guidelines. We're not clarifying all of the points here. We're just saying, okay, now we have squash. Now we have corn. Now we have string beans. And making room for those in your branding guidelines, and then take it small. Take it one step at a time. You don't even have to do all of your packaging all at once. But say you have...
So it's okay to have some deviation on the shelf.
Oh, for sure. Well, you see that. Thank you. Yes. I was actually thinking about that, where you'll see sodas. I'm not going to mention any in specific, Mountain Dew, but they'll have new flavors, or they'll have seasonal packaging coming out. And it'll be like Valentine's Day, and you still see their Christmas specials, in their packaging on the shelves. That's okay, right? You're going to have that. But case in point, you'll have this rolling change, right? And that's the same thing with small business packaging, small business branding. If you can't change every single one of your web pages, that's okay. You know what I mean? Start with new ones, or start with your main ones. Come up with a strategy to start small and say, okay, we're going to change anything new that we create going forward. Again, whether that's web pages or packaging or whatever. We're going to create this standard. We're identifying the holes. We're going to fill in one of these holes. And then going forward, we're going to make sure that hole is filled in along with the previous holes that we have already filled in. Right. And that way it's like this rolling change, right? This thing that you're constantly working for, and it's not so overwhelming that you have to stop everything in your business to achieve.
So I actually like that. I'm probably overcomplicating things. Like I said, not my strong suit. And
I mean, everybody does though, right? Because they want it to be a certain way.
Sure.
And you kind of got to let go of that, and that's okay. But
I've always pushed for either overhaul or no overhaul. Yeah. Like those are my two solutions. Yeah. Like, well, if you're ready to make the change,
right?
And
yeah, and it's just a matter of identifying what it is that you want to change, taking it small, making commitment to making one change, and then adding that to the repertoire of things that you do. And so, again, just to really clarify, and I'm going to use the example of packaging because this is very, it can add a lot of cost to a business. It adds a lot of time, resources, that kind of thing. If you say you have 30 SKUs out there and they're kind of all hodgepodge, in effect, they all look similar, but you can tell that they're different, right?
Right.
So start with the front. You start with the front of the packaging. You don't even have to change the entire packaging on all of them. It's just like, hey, when we come up to reorder, this one SKU or any SKU, then we're going to have the front of it look like this. These are the decisions that we've made around how the branding is going to look. So hopefully we answered some questions there. Hopefully we didn't just open up this nasty can of worms, but
shoot, I learned something.
Yeah. So hopefully that gave you guys a good jumping off point into the world of branding and staying consistent and getting everything all mapped out. If you have any questions or would like to reach out to us, please feel free to do so at marketingmanagementmoney.com or on Twitter. We are at MMMSmallBiz. That's at MMMSmallBiz. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Take care.